Today I have two stories about places you should never go, and they take a turn you won't see coming. Just so you know, the second story is far worse. Far North Queensland, Australia is famous for its beauty, but hidden in that beauty is something sinister most people never hear about. Thanks to eyewitness accounts and investigations, we have a clear understanding of how the events in this story unfolded. Josephine Falls lies south of Cairns at the base of Mount Bartle Frere in Australia, the tallest mountain in Queensland. At first glance, it seems almost safe, but then you notice the warning signs are everywhere, the word danger stamped in red. Everything about the place suggests terrible things have happened here. The top pool is restricted, there's a fence, and you don't cross it. You don't enter without a permit, this is the rule. But rules don't always stop people. Strong swimmers sometimes think they can handle the area with no problems, but they can't. The Najanji people, whose country this is, have said it for plenty of generations. Brattle Frere is not just a mountain, it's the highest peak and a sacred resting place. Elder Uncle Ernie Raymond said, after 4 p.m., them old people's spirit is still walking. After 4 p.m., you stay out. It's just too late. The old people are angry. And this wasn't just a story, it was a warning, and Uncle Eddie Ernie is unfortunately always right. On February afternoon in 2016, Thomas Hunt was with his girlfriend, Emily. They drove up from Cairns that day. They weren't rushing, but by the time they rolled into Josephine Falls car park, it was already after 4 o'clock. They stood at the gate, looking at the signs. There were plenty of them, bright red letters screaming danger, stick fingers tumbling down. A barred-off fence marked the upper pool. Even the spring-loaded gate they had just walked through was designed to force every visitor to stop, push, and look down at the warnings. But they went anyway. Not because they thought there was no risk, but because they misunderstood what the risk really was. Back in England, they had seen articles about tourists dying in certain parts of Australia, but they thought those warnings applied to some other place. Not this one. Not the calm pool right in front of them. They didn't know that the locals called the bottom pool the most deceptive place in far north Queensland. Emily would later say that the water felt fine. The surface was flat and the current was gentle. The sun was still out and another swimmer was climbing out as they arrived. He was smiling and unhurt. He just had a lot of fun. That gave them confidence. Emily filmed Thomas on her GoPro as they both laughed, still believing that this was just another fun stop on their road trip. Not a trap waiting to spring. They waded across the boulders and tested the water's current with their legs. It seemed pretty manageable, nothing too bad. Then they moved to a spot where the water slid thin and glassy across granite, the natural rock slide. This is what they had come for. They saw this on Instagram and knew that they had to do it themselves. So then they sat down together, side by side, holding hands. The current carried them slowly down into the pool. They popped up again, laughing, and then did it again. Everything just seemed fine. But behind them, Mount Bartle Frere was doing what it always does. On that day, the mountain had already started filling the system. The hydraulic model that was built later showed in detail that the bottom pool was rising minute by minute, shifting from safe to lethal. Thomas and Emily didn't know what was happening. If they did, they would have ran for their lives as fast as they could from that area. They only knew what they could see at the time. There was one moment where they could have backed out. Emily's phone buzzed with a push alert. It came from a government safety app that they had downloaded before the trip. The warning was clear: area at risk in far north Queensland. Emily showed it to Thomas, and they kind of just both shrugged. They assumed it applied to some other distant place, but not here. Not the exact spot that they were currently in, so they stayed. They only hesitated a moment, then they nodded at each other, held hands, and did it again. Emily remembers what happened next with clarity that will never leave her. She says it felt like a blade slicing through her connection. Mid-slide, the current tore them apart. 1 second they were together, the next they were gone from each other's reach. Emily hit the pool first. She knew instantly. Her body told her before her brain could even catch up. The water was stronger than she was. She flipped 3 times, tossed like driftwood, before breaking the surface. She gasped, eyes wide, lungs begging for air. She tried to angle toward the rocks where she had started, the place where she thought she could climb out. But the creek shoved her in the opposite direction. The current dragged her towards the deep central channel, away from the boardwalk, into the fastest and strongest line of the flow. It took 5 seconds for her to understand that this wasn't just rough water, this was a life or death situation. She kicked hard, fighting with everything she had, her hands clawing at the current as if there was something solid she could push against. Her knees slammed against the submerged ridges, scraping her skin away, and her palms slipped over the slime-coated rock. She coughed, choked, swallowed water, and kept pushing. Finally, she found a ridge and caught her hip and pressed herself against it, wedging her body into place. Her chest heaved, and her throat hurt from gasping and choking. She later lifted her head just long enough to look across the pool, and then saw him. It was Thomas. He was mid-channel, pinned against a boulder. The river hammered his waist and legs with the force of a freight train. He wasn't panicking. Not yet, but his face was tight and steady, the look of someone surviving 1 second at a time by sheer instinct. He turned his head toward her, water spraying across his face, and shouted one question. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Emily yelled back, her voice breaking, but she was alive. Thomas tried to shift his position and tried to climb back higher on the rock, but the current ripped him free like he was nothing. Emily saw it happen in front of her eyes. One moment he was braced, the next, he was gone. He vanished the way only water can take someone, weightless and unstoppable, as if invisible hands reached out and pulled him down. She watched him slide into a massive rock and then not come back out. For a second, she wasn't sure if this was all real or not. It didn't seem like it. And what Emily didn't know, but rescuers would later explain, is that behind rocks like that, where they were, the river builds something deadly. Swiftwater crews call it a keeper. It's a hydraulic trap, a recirculating boil where water drops into the hole and then curls back on itself at the surface. To the untrained eye, it looks like a safe pocket, the one calm place to cling to, but in reality, it's actually a death machine. Once you're in it, you don't climb back out, or at least most don't. Emily didn't know the word for what this was, but she understood what she had just seen. She screamed his name over and over again, her voice breaking with the sound of the current, but Thomas was not answering. There was no time to keep calling. She had to save herself at this point. She started to pull herself out of the water up into the forest. Her hands tore at wet roots, her feet slid in mud, and she kept climbing until after 5 or 6 desperate minutes, she burst onto the edge of the water again. From there, she ran barefoot, gasping, all the way back to the car park. A tow truck happened to be there, and she screamed for help. He grabbed his phone and tried to dial emergency services, but there was no signal. This place is notorious for being a blackout area. Emily ripped her own phone from her pack. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The screen was streaked with water and scratches. She saw a single bar of reception flicker in the corner and realized that was just enough, so she called and then prayed. Luckily, the call went through. The first responders were police officers from Babinda, a sergeant and a constable. They listened as Emily, breathless, told them what had happened. Then they sprinted down to the track of the bottom pool. When they arrived, they saw it instantly. The slide face was almost completely underwater. One of them had seen it earlier in the day. Now it was obvious. The creek had climbed fast, caused by a torrent of water from the mountain. Swiftwater crews were mobilized from the area. The emergency call went out at 5:47 p.m. The first team arrived at 6:10. Swiftwater rescue is exact. You don't throw a single rescuer into a current like that. They'll just die. You wait until you have a full team, 6 to 8 people usually, mostly level 2 technicians, everyone trained and equipped. They came with throw bags, personal flotation devices, helmets, and even an inflatable work platform strapped to a quad bike. They had the gear, but they didn't have the daylight. They searched the banks as far as they could, sweeping eddies, alcoves, any place the water slowed, but the terrain beat them back. The granite walls were too steep, and the current was too strong. Visibility was nothing, and at 7:16 p.m. the order was given to end the search. There is a line between rescue and try everything. That night, the line held. At first light, they came back. The team set lines across the creek, stretching step by step, never dropping lower than splash height. At 11:15 a.m., 19 hours after Thomas had been ripped away, they found him. He had been about a mile, or 1.8 kilometers downstream, caught in a side channel off of Josephine Creek. His body bore the marks of trauma from boulders, but the autopsy said what the river already had. He drowned. The search was over, and what came next was paperwork and testimony. But in this case, it mattered. The coroner traced it cleanly. Rain from Brattle Frere, sudden rise downstream, in the exact window when Thomas and Emily had entered the pool between 4:45 and 5 p.m. was the perfect storm to cause a death. 5 deaths at Josephine Falls had happened since 2007, most of them in that same pool. It wasn't random, it was a system, a mountain that catches more rain than you can see, and that was the truth the inquest left behind. Now we're going to go on to story number 2. Seen from afar, Mount Ijen could be mistaken for an ordinary mountain, but at the summit it is something found nowhere else on Earth. There's a massive crater, and inside it sits a lake that glows turquoise. The color is so bright it looks unreal, like someone poured paint into the bowl of the mountain. Locals call the lake a ticking time bomb. Some officials downplay the risk, but people who live near Ijen know better. Just ask the miners, and many of them still won't talk about what happened in 2020. The lake is not normal water. It is a pool of acid and is the largest acidic lake on the planet. Its pH is close to 0, and that means that metal melts in it, and that skin burns in it. Even the air above the lake is not safe. Sulfur gas rises from the cracks and vents, and sometimes the gas comes out in sudden bursts that you cannot see. If you breathe it, your throat burns and your chest locks up. If you cannot get out in time, you pass out, and if no one pulls you out into clean air, you simply die. And yet people still come. Sometimes at night, tourists will walk up to the ridge on the top, and they want to see the blue fire from the sulfur gas that escapes from the rock and touches the air and catches fire. It burns bright blue in the dark. Many do not understand what they are standing above. They don't know the rules of this place, and no one really tells them. There is no long speech. The ones who do know are the miners. They go down into the crater every day when the tourists are not around. They carry big iron bars and use these tools to hammer at the yellow rock. They break the sulfur into jagged pieces, and it smells horrible up there, kinda like matches, and it stings your eyes and burns your throat. The miners tie wet cloths across their mouths and noses for protection, but it really doesn't do that much. That's almost all they have. Some of them will buy protective masks, but they don't last long, and they wear them far past their expiration date. Some of the miners say that they have built a tolerance to the burning and don't use any protection at all, but the truth is, their nerves have just gone numb from constant exposure. When the miners knock loose a big slab, they load it into baskets. Some of these baskets weigh up to 200 pounds, and they carry them back down the crater. They do this twice a day. The pay for this work is $10 to $15 for the whole day, and it is absolutely brutal. And as a result of this work, almost none of the miners grow to old age. It was midday on May 29th, 2020. The tourists had left. Only miners were in the crater, and overall, the crews work late on their quotas because some of them would be fired at the end of the day if they don't hit them. To make things harder, recently some of them had already quit because their lungs were too damaged to go on, which is kind of common. Others had asked for better pay and didn't get it. Everyone felt the pressure to work without stopping for safety measures. The scene looked like any other that hard day, but a few things did feel off. All of a sudden, the ground shifted. It was not a hard hit. It didn't throw anyone down to the ground, just kind of a slow roll under their boots. A few miners kind of looked at each other as if something strange had happened, and others just kept working as normal because they either didn't care or they were too focused on hitting their quota. Then the air changed dramatically. It turned sharp and metallic. Every breath felt like pulling smoke from a hot rag. The cloth masks did not help. The men ripped them off and gasped for air, but that brought more gas inside and their eyes began to burn even worse. Someone pointed towards the lake. The surface looked different. It was no longer still, and ripples ran across it in circles. A few miners mentioned that they had never seen it move like that. Then the water began to rise. At first it was only a small swell. Then the entire surface lifted like a wide wall. The first surge slammed against the far side of the crater and burst into white foam. And then it came back even higher. Shouts burst out as the miners realized they had to run for their lives because they knew what was going to happen to them. Some of them ran towards a zigzag trail and climbed out towards the rim. Others just froze there, shocked, unable to move because they couldn't make sense of what they just saw until someone would shove them and tell them to run for their lives. Up on the rim, a ranger lifted his radio. His words were silent. He said there had been a disturbance and things are progressing rapidly. The reply came fast. Close the trail, close the rim, shut everything down. Inside the crater, the waves kept hitting and the spray foam burned skin on contact. Near the edge, two miners were still at work until one of them dropped his iron bar and ran upslope. He looked back once and would never forget what he saw. His friend hesitated because he was far below his daily quota and he needed to hit it or he would be fired. He thought he would be able to fill his sulfur basket before he attempted to run to safety. That single thought cost him everything. The wave reached him. From where he stood, the ground simply vanished. The shelf dropped into deep water and he surfaced for one breath. His arms thrashed and his skin turned red where the toxic water had touched him. A second surge slammed into him and dragged him sideways into the boiling foam. He clawed at empty air. There was nothing for him to grab onto. Then the foam completely closed over him. The miner who had run first stumbled upslope. He coughed so hard he almost fell, but he forced himself upward and to look back once more. The waves hit again and again. Each one was smaller than the last, and then the tremor eased. The rangers made the call. The park was closed and no one else was let in, but it seemed like things were getting better. Miners gathered higher on the path until the air was a little better. They checked eyes and they checked their hands and their throats. Most everything was burned and they were coughing, but still standing. One man was missing. Everyone knew who it was, but no one said his name at first. A call went down to the staging hut. A miner was unaccounted for. The last place he was ever seen was near the eastern arc. The reply came back firm. Teams are on the way, but do not re-enter the basin. By late afternoon, the search shifted higher along the rim. Searchers raised binoculars and scanned the entire area, and then the light began to fade. The teams began to pull back because they knew the risks at night inside the crater were far too high. At first light, the searchers returned. On the east side, they found the first sign of a potential survivor, a yellow hard hat floating against a rock shelf. The paint was blistered and the strap was gone, but they kept scanning the water as if the hat might point to something more. Late in the afternoon, a guide walked fast toward the rangers. He kept his voice low as he said a tourist was missing, not from the morning group or any list, but a man who had slipped through before dawn. The tourist had paid one of the miners to take him closer to the lake than was allowed for an interview. He wanted a video for his channel of him standing near the vent where the blue fire burned at night. His friend had not told anyone because he was afraid of going to jail for breaking the rules. Indonesia is a country that, well, you just never want to end up in that prison system. The ranger wanted to know where the friend was. The guide pointed to a young man in a gray shirt. He wouldn't lift his eyes from the ground, but when the ranger called him over, he came over reluctantly, his hands kind of trembling like he might be sick. They had arrived at the gate long before first light, slipping past into the dark with only a small red filtered lamp to guide them so they wouldn't be seen. The miner met them below the line and led them down a side path that tourists never use. One that would wind into the crater where the air already carried the sting of sulfur. They paid him in cash, and for the next 20 minutes they filmed as the tourist crept towards the vent, ignoring warnings. The miner told him again and again to keep his mask tight and stay behind, but the man wanted a better shot. He kept inching closer and closer to the stream on the edge of the lake, and each time the miner had to pull him back. Then the ground trembled and the lake moved. The young man who told the story said he ran, though he couldn't remember how he reached the ridge or if anyone had been behind him. He hid near the trail, too afraid to speak, convinced he would be arrested and thrown in jail if anyone knew he had broken the rules. When the ranger asked for proof, the young man handed over his phone. His eyes went wet, he started crying and his mouth was trembling again as he whispered apologies over and over. They played the clip on the phone. The audio carried a high whistle, followed by a voice warning. Move back. Another voice laughed and said, just one more step. The camera jolted and a white glare filled the frame, and then the recording cut out. Word spread quickly along the rim. Some believed that the tourist might have found a path and slipped out without getting reported. Others were certain that he had been pulled into the crater and was trapped. A few clung on to the idea that he might still be alive in a pocket along the wall, terrified and waiting to be rescued, but no one could say for sure. Searchers continued scanning, calling out to see if anyone would respond. Near a notch in the rock, they discovered a torn mask. Whether it was new or old, they couldn't really tell. Masks here were lost every week. A call came from further along the rim. Another yellow hard hat washed up in a pocket on the rocks. This was not the same hat that they had seen the day before. The paint was still bright, but the strap had been torn away as if ripped off in a single violent motion. A miner stepped forward and said he knew it. It belonged to the man who had guided the tourist down into the crater before dawn. The team turned their focus back to the notch. They prepared their equipment, and the young man in the gray shirt spoke up again. He said that he had another file on his phone, a short memo that his friend had recorded while setting up the camera. The ranger listened. The memo mentioned a notch and a yellow stain above it, shaped like a hand. Then the ranger looked at the wall. He saw the faint streak that gave the searchers a clear point of reference. The ranger's plan was simple: watch the currents, and sooner or later, the lake would return what it had taken. All afternoon, the team scanned the water. At dawn, the lookout spotted movement far out in the curve. Something rolled with the current. The team rigged a rope and leaned out with a hook, and then pulled the shape in closer. For a moment, no one spoke. From a distance, it could have been a body. Some even said they saw an arm. But then the shape turned and the truth came out. It wasn't a man. It was a backpack. A green one with a camera case strapped to it. Inside was a sealed phone in plastic that was dead. The boy in the gray shirt broke down when he saw it. It was his friend's pack. The camera was supposed to hold the footage they came for, but now it was the only proof that the lake had taken him. The rangers didn't really have much to say, and the miners said nothing at all, because they had seen this pattern before, and they knew the truth. The lake only gives back in small pieces, scraps, and reminders of what it has taken. By the next morning, Mount Ijen looked calm again, but those who understood the mountain knew it was obvious that the calm was only a mask, and that the lake had decided, at least for now, to keep it secret. And with that, I just want to say thanks for watching the video until the end, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Don't forget to hit the bell notification as well, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.